Senator Fred Mitchell fires back at comments made by the Deputy Prime Minister. Police arrest an alleged child abductor on Grand Bahama, and a local graduating class gives back. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Friday, January 8th. Progressive Liberal Party Chairman Senator Fred Mitchell labeling recent comments made by Works Minister Desmond Bannister during a talk show guest appearance on oil drilling as duplicitous, disgraceful, and intellectually dishonest. Senator Mitchell says as much in a statement released on Wednesday. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Works Desmond Bannister on the talk show indicated that the Bahamas Petroleum Company was formed in opposition leader Philip Davis's law firm, adding that it's important to know who actually has an interest in this project. Mr. Bannister further noted that licenses were also granted in 2007, just before the general election, and that the royalties were never meant to benefit the Bahamian people. Well, yesterday, Senator Mitchell said that Mr. Bannister, during that interview, sought to repudiate, flip-flop on, and deflect from the policy position of the Free National Movement cabinet. He says the F&M government cannot get away with blaming the opposition for their actions.
Well, there's a lot of games being played with this matter of drilling for oil. And I say it this way: never mind what they say, look at what they do. The fact is, there's oil drilling in the Bahamas under the Free National Movement. So that tells you the Free National Movement believes in drilling for oil. If they didn't believe in drilling for oil, there would be no drilling for oil. You cannot say, as the minister said, out of one side of your mouth, that you had this ironclad agreement or license that you couldn't get out of. And so that is why the oil drilling is taking place. And then at the same time say that if you find oil, we're going to renegotiate the royalty. Well, if the agreement is so ironclad, how are you going to renegotiate the royalty? And then at the end of the statement, he says that a sovereign government, in response to the question from reporters, always has the way of persuading or changing or cajoling. So, if you can do so on that, you could have done so on the license issue.
Mr. Mitchell says the fact is that oil drilling is done successfully in a number of countries.
Guyana is going to have an 86% growth in its GDP as a result of a substantial oil find offshore over the last 2 years. It can be done responsibly. Any government looking at $5 billion, I say billion, to $20 billion of revenue would be foolish and unwise not to consider that as a possibility. What is happening now is an exploratory well. It's not a well where oil is going to be pumped to see what is there. And so you have to know what is there before a government can make a decision. What we do know is on the other side of the border, within miles of that oil well, that exploratory well, the Cubans are extracting oil out of the sea. That tells you what the facts are.
He's also urging the government to table the agreement in Parliament. Now asked if a PLP government would support oil drilling, Mr. Mitchell says this.
The Progressive Liberal Party granted the license. We don't step away from that. What we say is that all lawful activity in the country we support. And there's, I'm not sure why people are saying that this is such a moral, as if it's some big moral issue. It isn't. The fact is that despite the environmental concerns, both things can coexist. Now, if there are overweening factors that show that it is unsafe, no government would proceed. No government would be proceeding. But the point is, again, given the revenue that they say may potentially be there, a government would be foolish not to consider it.
Dr. Adele Thomas, a climate change specialist and director of the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Research, says that the Bahamas Petroleum Company's exploratory offshore oil drilling in Bahamian waters is absolutely against the country's best interest. She says as much during the Bahamas Business Outlook virtual press conference.
I think it is absolutely against our best interests as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change to pursue oil drilling. It is the equivalent of us being in a sinking ship and asking the international community for help while at the same time drilling holes in the hull and throwing out our lifeboat.
Dr. Thomas also says that the international community is not turning a blind eye to the oil drilling situation in the Bahamas.
I would say the international community is paying attention. So you would see that letter that the Congress people from Florida sent over. So they're very much paying attention. I think when we start looking for bilateral aid, particularly from the United States with the new Biden administration coming in, then they will look at what actions are we doing to help ourselves. And I think that will influence, aid that will come to us specifically for climate change.
Dr. Thomas will speak next week at the Bahamas Business Outlook webinar on the National Emergency Management Perspectives and Options. The Progressive Liberal Party is also preparing for an early election in 6 months to be exact. This much coming from its chairman, Senator Fred Mitchell, who says the party's aiming to complete its roster of candidates as early as February 1st. He says this much on the sidelines of a PLP COVID task force press conference yesterday, and here's why.
We know that the other side has already got their paraphernalia and everything ordered, so we're lined up in the same direction because the indications are that this man intends to call an election before the next budget. And so Bahamians ought to be anticipating within 6 months a full slate of candidates, but also a full campaign unfolding.
That said, Mr. Mitchell adds that the party has completed aspirant candidate interviews on Grand Bahama and will conduct its final interviews on Eleuthera next week. Asks what indicators are pointing to an early election, the senator says private intelligence has informed the party that the FNM is also preparing their campaign. He adds that the prime minister is, quote, using the pandemic to campaign up and down the country and will seek to push it as part of his campaign.
So the idea is, while there is a kind of period of relative calm in this winter period, that they will use this and say, look how well we have managed the pandemic. We have saved the nation. We need to continue to be at the wheel. That's their campaign. And they want to do it before the budget takes place, because they know that when the budget takes place, it's going to be, if not $1.5 billion, $2 billion in borrowing again, and cuts in the public service and in public spending. So what you do is you campaign that everything is great. I managed everything great. You do it before the budget, and then you hope you win. And when you win, you just bring down the guillotine and the bitter medicine, and you say, well, sorry.
The country held its last general election in May 2017 and has to hold the next one by May 2022. Well, Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis was not shy for words today, responding to PLP Chairman Fred Mitchell's comments about an early election. He says that he was given 5 years to govern and plans to follow through.
If the PLP followed my history, even as opposition, they would note that I've always commenced preparation at least 2 years in advance. And when we came into government, we made a commitment and a promise that we would move through all the various family islands and constituencies, informing them as to what is happening, especially if there are new events. We wanted to engage all family islanders because they contribute also to the national revenue.
Asked if he's pleased with the government's progress since being elected into office, Dr. Minnis says this.
I think considering the challenges that we face, when we came in, we were immediately faced with Hurricane Irma. We did what was never done in the history of the Bahamas, in that we air evacuated individuals from the southern Bahamas to the central zone so that no lives were lost. We were still on target with our commitments, our promises, and the revenue projection. Then we were hit with Dorian. In spite of that, we were still moving forward. And Dorian obviously would have affected our revenue stream dramatically. We had to concentrate on lives, we had to concentrate on rebuilding both Grand Bahama and Abaco. That obviously would have thrown us off course in terms of our commitment with the manifesto. Then us and the world were hit with COVID. That affected not only us, but the entire world. Our basic economy is tourism. That was affected dramatically. But in spite of that, we continued, we persevered.
The minister-led administration defeated the Progressive Liberal Party in a landslide victory at the polls in 2017. San Salvador up to 7 COVID-19 cases, New Providence to 5,779, with the Ministry of Health reporting 10 additional new cases of the virus in country. 9 of those cases on New Providence, 1 on San Salvador. These 10 cases pushed the national total to 7,969. 1,429 cases are active. 16 cases recovered yesterday, pushing recovered cases to 6,313. 11 of the active cases are hospitalized, all considered moderately ill. Health officials say 402 tests were completed yesterday, 387 negative results, 3 were repeated tests, and 2 results were inconclusive. To date, 54,244 tests have been completed. The death toll remains at 175. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.